this is Kadoosh, and welcome to a little video I'm making on patch 0.3 changes relevant to my builds. So, Firebreaker and the Corrupting Cry build. The Fart Decompose build isn't really relevant in last patch and hasn't changed for anything that could see it revive its revival, and so I won't mention that. I also have a build in the background that I'm working on, and I'll go over that as well after going these first. First things first, removed one support restriction. This is a pretty significant change in Path of Exile 2, as this was one of the key principles they kind of worked their skill system on, because most skills could have 6 supports, but now they just removed it. So that's going to change a lot. It means maybe we can have Batter Shout with more supports that would normally have our normal War Cry, Seismic Cry, or we can also have AoE on pretty much everything that would have it. So it's a pretty positive change, at least when it comes to buffs. I don't see this how it's negative in any way, really. Many supports have now gained tiers. So Brutality, for example, which is what we use in Seismic Cry, because it's one of the few gems that actually scales Corrupting Blood, is gonna get tiers. We don't know exactly the numbers. There's been some leaked stuff from some Chinese sites and stuff, but it looks like it'll just be better. Hopefully the tier 3 brutality is quite significant for us, because we weren't really getting much damage, and we lost some damage from patch 0.1 because of strength scaling and stuff, but that should be nice. 40 lineage supports. This is actually interesting for us, as especially there's a Corrupting Cry lineage support. It's kind of like a unique support. You can only have one of these in your build. But this one specifically, I'll bring it up here. This Paquette's Pact, and it's basically the normal Corrupting Cry support gem, except for the fact that it now applies 5 Corrupted Blood debuffs in one Corrupting Cry, or one War Cry, instead of the one that we normally do. So effectively, we need the War Cry only twice to get up to 10 stacks. But lose 2% of max life per Corrupted Blood inflicted by supported skills. This is an insane downside that it will insta kill you, basically, if we're reading this correctly. Like if you hit like 10 creatures at the same time, you will just die. So I'm not really sure how you'd make this work. But if we could make it work, it'd obviously be really good, because you don't have to War Cry twice, and clear would be a lot better, considering how War Cries are a bit not as smooth to use anymore. So we'll see. Who knows? Well, it'll just have to require some testing. There's some energy shield. Like if you can go energy shield instead of life, it means you don't have to care about your life as much. But maybe you have to regen it. It's gonna be interesting. But for now, it's not really worth considering in the build. New Warcry gem, Fortifying Cry. Form a Warcry that grants guard and causes subsequent shield skills to release. Blah 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 blah. We don't really care about the shield skills. Maybe, who knows, maybe we incorporate that into the build, but for now, that's not something we worry about. The thing that is good though is it grants guard. It actually grants a lot of guard. At level 20, it's hard to say, we don't know the numbers, but assuming that it gives you close to 1,000 guard or close to that, that's 1,000 guard permanently you will have on your character. If you're going to spam Fortifying Cry instead of Seismic Cry, for example, it just gives you this extra HP pool, and it's kind of like regen as well in a sense. So 100% you incorporate this in a build. Whether or not it's like your main War Cry instead of Seismic, that's something we'll have to decide. But it's just insane defensive capabilities here, and hopefully that saves some of the other nerfs that we got to defense lower down. Gaining guard while you have guard no longer replaces the 16 buff. This is just quality of life, so that we don't have to worry about like getting like a mini guard shield instead of like a big one, so you don't override the big one. After requirements lowered by 25%. This applies to both items and skill gems, so that's just really nice across the board. Blocking, you now block all hits, similar to how Turtle Charm currently works. You can block damage from all hits while shield is raised. this is now just default for everyone, which is interesting because it means Turtle Charm isn't that impressive anymore as well before, but it also means we only have 50% block cap, which is a big nerf to us if we want to go full block, as I'll mention a bit lower. But it's a massive buff to block in general, I'd say. There's also most of the increases the block chance and stuff on shields has been reduced though to compensate. So it will be harder to get to 50%. I don't know if it's the same, if it's like the exact same to get to 75% as it is now to get to 50%. But you will still have to want to get the cap, right? A lot more accuracy for close range. Basically, you can't miss now if you're within 2 meters of an enemy. That's just nice. Totems obviously do have a bit more range than normally we did, so it's hard to say how it works with totems, if it's dependent on where they stand relative to the enemy or where we stand. But either way, it's still a buff for us. Swapping weapons is now instant. As you can recall, in the Corrupting Cry build, we swapped weapons a lot. Even in Firebreaker, we did. And this alleviates a lot of problems with getting caught out in shield form, as well as having to get weapon swap speed on jewels. You don't have to worry about that anymore. It's such an insane buff that I feel like every build kind of has to have weapon swapping now. Just so good. The quality of life will be absolutely crazy. You will have to, like, just leveling, you will want to use weapon swaps. 100%. Warbringer got some significant changes. Warbringer Ascendancy. It got +1 to totems, but that's on the Ancestral Answered Call notable, which we didn't use before, but we probably will now that block has changed. So that's just good. Warcry nodes are now combined. So for example, Great Wolf's Howl and Warcry's Bellow, they're just together now. We get 2 free extra ascendancy points that we can use anywhere else. So that's just really good for us. Like that. Renly's training got nerfed a bit, unfortunately. So it's instead of 40 block base on a shield, it's now 35 base, which is still good considering you only need to get up to 50% now by default. So in that sense, it's still a really nice node. But I wonder if you might not even go this altogether because of Turtle Charm. Since everyone gets the all block by default, Turtle Charm has to do something else. In this case, you take 30% of damage from blocked hits, but your maximum block chance is now 75. So effectively, from previous patch, it's just worse by 30%, effectively. Because before, we didn't have this. We lost a bit of block, but you know, the block you already lost technically before because of the block changes now. So you basically just take 30% more damage than you would. A massive nerf, and I don't think you even go for Turtle Charm anymore. I don't think it's worth. Some people did the math, and apparently it's like a 5% damage reduction, give or take, at 75 block, compared to if you have no damage or no hit penalty or no damage taken through blocked hits and just 50% block. So I probably won't go for Turtle Charm, Corrupting Blood anymore. Stacks of Jade are no longer lost. So this is a node that nobody used, Jade Heritage. And it gave you a stack of Jade, which was basically just 1% physical damage reduction. And now, before, if you got hit, you lost one of those stacks. So it's basically very hard to be at max stacks if you're taking hits. And now you don't lose those stacks anymore. So it also means you can use the Encasing Jade at full effectiveness pretty much all the time. And it also means you can have 10% physical damage reduction. So, and 10% physical damage reduction is a very rare stat, as I explained in my Firebreaker build. That's why we were using the unique Hollow Mask, because it had 10% damage reduction. Is it worth two ascendancy points? Hard to say, but I'll definitely consider using it now. Ancestral Spirits are better. I mean, these little minions that came out when you summon totems from Answered Call, they give a lot more buffs now. the bigger buffs, or the AoE is bigger on them, and they sometimes last longer or come out sooner. So it's just nice quality of life. We might be using this in Corrupting Cry now, possibly, because of we have that extra point to work with. Smith of Katava. Fortunately, Smith of Katava didn't really get so much of a rework like Warbringer and buffs. It's more of nerfs. The Flowing Metal notable passive skill, so the body armor passive that had 5% max resistance, is now just 30% of armor applied to elemental damage from hits. This is another stat that was added to a lot of gear now for armor to try and mitigate elemental damage with armor, because normally you just the only thing you had was max resistance, which it kind of worked, but it didn't feel like you were as tanky as the numbers would suggest. But unfortunately, armor applies before resistance in PoE2, which is a big difference from PoE1. So it's much less effective because armor is more effective the less damage you take. So if you still take the full damage first, effectively, because the resistance isn't applied, it means the armor isn't as effective, and then the resistance applies. So it's hard to say how impactful something like this will be, but I don't think it'll be. The current consensus is that it won't be. The other bindings grants 3% regen instead of 5. We were using this because 5% regen was insanely powerful, and now it's less powerful. So that sucks. Reduce some fire resistance on the small nodes. I mean, you just need a bit of resistance more on gear, but nothing too impactful. Small passive prior to living weapon. I got 5% increased strength. This is actually really nice compared to what we gave before. Would you take this? I mean, we use living weapon in the weapon swap setup with Setha's spear for the fire damage increase, or the 100% extra ignite damage. But as I'll explain a bit later, you probably won't be playing that type of firebreaker, like one shot ignite. But sure, I guess it's nice if you want to play a strength stacker. Who knows? Maybe Mythic Katava is another play. Giant's Blood Keystone passive skill now halves the amount of life granted by strength. This, I mean, I knew they had to change Giant's Blood because it was basically mandatory in every warrior build, but this is a really significant nerf. And warriors were already struggling on defense, and now you even have less HP to work with. So it's just a nerf for both the builds. Source of increased area effect, now below breaks problems 20%. We picked up pretty much all the area effect on the tree as a warrior on the Firebreaker build. Now we just have 25% less of that, so that sucks. The mana cost of skills lowered at higher levels. This is nice. It's hard to say how impactful this is, but especially for the totem build, if we're going to go for very high totem levels again, this would have pretty insane impact. Hard to say how much, but who knows, maybe even half. Won't kill yourself as easily. Slightly less movement speed penalty after using a skill. This is nice. The Warcry build was kind of struggling a bit in past 0.2 because it was much slower, or you couldn't just spam Warcries back to back and move basically at the same pace as you did before. So hopefully this impacts that a bit. Low level curse level skills won't affect high level mobs. So for example, in both our builds, in the Firebreaker, we had a low level flammability because you need int flammability. Maybe because of the reduced attribute requirements, it won't be as impactful anymore. But if we don't use a high enough level flammability, it won't work on monsters. So it might mean in some builds you just can't use a curse because you can't have the intelligence to be able to use a high enough level curse for it to work. So that sucks. In the case of Corrupting Cry, we also used a very low level Enfeeble, and this would probably mean that Enfeeble wouldn't work either. Massive change. Shockwave Totem and Ancestral Warrior Totem now use your equipped weapons. This is pretty significant. Before on Corrupting Cry, you'd only stat you needed on your maces was plus the level of melee skills. Now that's not the case anymore. Now you will actually need a good weapon for the totem to do good damage. It's interesting to say because we don't know the scaling yet of how this works, but even if it's just 1-to-1, you can basically get to the same kind of values with a two-handed mace as you could before because it was about 600 top end, and you can get about 600 top end on a mace. It has to be a really good mace, but it does mean you can now get crit, attack speed, and other stats on your maces that will then affect your totems. So a lot of the stats on a weapon will be much more impactful now. So the scaling options are probably a lot higher. Who knows? Maybe crit is now a viable option for totems. It says the warrior totem now has no limit, so it means you can have an infinite amount of them at the same time. But now requires consuming 3 endurance charges to raise. This is a very interesting change, which completely flips Corrupting Cry build on its head, because normally we weren't generating any endurance charges, especially not for single target. So we would have to now figure out a way to do that, which I will explain of a way I've come up with. It is interesting though, because if you can figure out a way to get a lot of endurance charges, you can have a lot of totems, because there's no limit anymore. It also has mace skills now have less attack speed, but keep in mind that because we don't have the base attack speed on the totem anymore, it uses our mace attack speed. I don't know if this would have too much effect, because our mace in general would probably attack faster. I don't know though. It's possible it doesn't, and it's just much slower now. This was actually 25% in the reveal, and then they changed this to 50% in the patch notes. So according to DGG, Warrior Totem, Ancestral War Totem is pretty strong, but as shown here, Batter Shout was also shown as pretty strong, but then they nerfed it into the ground before it even released, and it's still terrible. There's 50% more damage on bosses, but obviously you weren't using that on bosses, so that's whatever. I mean, who knows? You might still use Batter Shout, because at least you now can have duplicate support gems, so it's not too bad. And we have another Warcry. We can have one Warcry just for Batter Shout, maybe. Earth Shatter got a new cool quality. Quality now provides 6% more damage for hits for each spike. This is interesting, because if the totems are casting it, we don't know if this would apply to every spike of every totem, because it now says detonates all triggers all existing spikes. So well, who knows? If this works and it triggers all the spikes of every totem, it means you can technically preload, like, well, depends on how many totems you have, but preload a shit ton of spikes, because each totem had its own spike limit, and you do a way more damage. So that'd be interesting. If this works and it shares between all the totems, that's an insane damage boost. Even if it doesn't, it's still a good damage boost. Infernal Cry has a less damage boost now. It used to be up to 150%, but now it's just like 60-ish% of extra damage of extra fire, which is a pretty significant nerf to the Firebreaker build. It also doesn't have Warcry speed anymore, so it's a bit more clunky. Scavenge Plating got nerfed to now only have 4% more per stack at all levels, and the quality doesn't give more armor per stack anymore, so it's just 4% from 7%. No idea why they nerfed this. Armor was already bad, but apparently GGG doesn't agree, I guess. Hard to say. Seismic Cry no longer resets its own cooldown. So basically, if you want to Corrupting Cry spam, you have to do it on a Warbringer now. You can't, there's no other way to do it. Unless you can maybe get like low cooldown. I guess you get really low cooldown Warcries and then try and do it that way, but that sounds clunky. It also lost 40% Warcry speed on the quality, so that sucks. But we won't have to get weapon swap speed anymore, so we can get Warcry speed on jewels, for example. It also is interesting is that I mentioned that the nodes here are combined, right? Which means you actually get Great Wolf's Howl immediately when you get your first Ascendancy. So you can actually start Warcrying with Infernal Cry and Corrupting Cry from level like 23, I think is about when you get your first Ascendancy. That's a massive buff to leveling, and I'll be doing that come League start probably. Thunder no longer has an increased attack time, so that's nice. But it has 35% of base instead of 65 of attack speed. So it's still really slow, but at least you can scale it more. You can scale the attack speed a bit better. The massive line. no longer consumes fully broken armor to guarantee a critical. This kills single target of our Firebreaker build. Because we had an entire weapon swap tree was crit damage and crit effects. And now that this no longer works, you can't do single target. Like Sunder will do jack shit damage. So it increases a bit of physical damage taken, but obviously we're doing fire damage, so that doesn't matter for us. So yeah, so Firebreaker is basically dead. I probably won't update it. Someone can maybe take the ideas with Resonating Shield and stuff. I saw other people using Resonating Shield and just clearing Resonating Shield and Armor Break. But I feel like you need lots of gear for that to work. So yeah, that sucks. So that build is dead, basically. One change. Infernal Clasp and the Deepest Power deleted, or at least temporarily removed. Deepest Tower was one of the most used uniques for warriors because it was just so good. It solved Corrupting Cry DPS. We didn't actually need to use it in Firebreaker. We did use Infernal Clasp, which is the belt that gave 6% max fire resistance. So that sucks. And getting to 90% fire resistance, not max fire resistance now, is going to be really hard. I don't know how you'd even do it without insane investment now. Smith of the cover. Don't play that, Sentency. Probably what I'd recommend. Critical damage bonus nerfed in lots of places. This would probably assume the skill tree and stuff. So again, another nerf to, well, again, we can't crit, so who cares, I guess. But in the scenario that we could crit, or we find another way to crit and do less damage now. And last but not least, small change is that soul cores are not unique to most item types. So for example, the 2% max life rune or socketable from the Trial of Chaos that you could put into all gear, you now only put chest piece. So you can't the one way that you get to increase your max life is now gone. Very interesting. I guess they don't want you to just use one rune. They want you to use several, which is interesting. Yeah, I guess that means if you wanted to just scale max life, you can't. So what am I planning for 0.3 league start? It's gonna be Corrupting Cry again. Maybe that's not the news some of you guys want to hear, but considering all the changes it's gotten, it needs pretty much a total rework for it to be viable again. And I want to at least have one build that I'm confident in that's gonna work. And I'm pretty confident in Corrupting Cry working this patch, but it needs changes. The main changes, of course, is that Ancestral Totem now uses endurance charges. Ancestral Warrior Totem. So we have to incorporate that into the build somehow. And the way I figured out to do that is via Hateforge. So Hateforge has a couple lines here. Gain 1 to 3 random charges on reaching maximum rage. And lose all rage on reaching maximum rage. Which means that as long as you generate rage, you're generating charges. One way we can generate rage is with Enraging Cry. So Enraging Cry gives you 4 power per power of the enemy. What that means is that you can get up to, a boss has normally 20 power. If you get 1 Warcry on 1 boss, you get 16 rage per Warcry. With Hateforge, you can get your minimum or max rage down to 20. But with this and Red Blade Banner, which doubles the power of enemies, so instead of a boss having 20 power, it has 40 power. And at 40 power, 1 Warcry will give us 32 rage per Warcry, which is already 2 more than the normal max rage that you can get. So 1 Warcry means that Hateforge gives us 3 random charges. So 3 random charges per Warcry. Seismic Cry can go down to 0.25 cast time. I'm 100% sure you can get this lower with some tech and other, more passives on the tree and stuff. Which means 4 Warcries a second, which means 12 random charges per second, which means about 4 random 4 endurance charges per second. Per second. With good soul core, go to Elite's soul core of endurance, which is soul core you can put into martial weapons. So into our mace, for example, it allows for, or you get 50% chance to get an extra endurance charge when you get an endurance charge, and you can get 2 of them, so it's a 100% chance to get 1 extra endurance charge. So effectively, we get double endurance charge gain, which means 8 endurance charges per second. That's 2 ancestral warrior totems per second we can put down, because each ancestral warrior totem costs 3 endurance charges, and we'll have 6/6 cap endurance charges, so we can put down 2 at a time. Ancestral warrior totems has a base duration of 10 seconds with quality, but we can get 85 duration on the tree. This here, Tides of Change and protraction, as well as from jewels. So that means a 18.5 second duration. And if we're casting 2 ancestral warrior totems per second, this is maybe an overestimate, but you know, napkin math. That's 36 totems we can have out at once. 36 totems. Imagine 36 totems on your screen. It's gonna be hectic, but it sounds hilarious. And because of a totem scaling, which we have 6% attack speed per totem that's out, that's 216 increased attack speed for each totem because you have so many totems. The absurdity is going to be crazy. So you can see that it's not so much a Corrupting Cry build anymore, it's more like a totem army build. But of course, for clear, you're not going to be able to put down this many totems at once all the time. But it is cool because you can put down 1 totem once in a while, and it will be up and, you know, clearing enemies until its duration expires or dies. As for changes to the skill tree, we're still waiting on the new passive tree. I've noticed in some of the Chinese leaks that we're getting like at least 2 or maybe even 3 Warcry clusters. Gonna be 1 here, I believe, and as well as 1 over here or something. No idea what they give. Hopefully one of them gives increased power, because then we don't have to use Red Blade Banner, which is a pretty weak shield by itself. It's a nice shield because it's 25 strength. You know, it's not nothing. Gives a bit of, it's decent, but if we don't have to use this, we can obviously have a much better shield because of the power. But the power is pretty necessary, because otherwise we go from 1 Warcry giving us max rage to 2 Warcries giving us. So we kind of need to use that shield. As for the rest, it's pretty close to what it was before. There's still a lot of optimization. Like, this is just kind of something I put together pretty quick, so don't really worry about this. I'll be updating the guide and also probably streaming it live on my Twitch channel, so you can see the progress and why it changed and stuff. But like, for example, this node over here, recover 3% of max life for every endurance charge consumed. With all of these, you consume 3 endurance charges every time you put down a totem. So you'll get 21%. But let's see, I believe it's 2 + 2, 6, 9. 9 times 3 is 27. So 27% of your life every time you summon a totem. And we're summoning 2 totems per second. So in theory, you know, obviously this doesn't really work out in practice, I'm probably sure, but that's 40. No, it's not even 40. That's, no, I can't do math. Okay, now it's 54. I believe 54, yeah, % of your life every time, every second. That's absurd. That's an absurd amount of life. Every time we put a totem, we just regen to full. So that's going to be interesting. Who knows? Maybe they nerf this in the next patch, but if not, or in the patch, the passive tree changes. But if not, that's the idea. So the current plan is Corrupting Cry with a 36 totem army. And of course, because of the ascendancy changes, we will only take War Comms Bella before. Currently, plan is to not take any block. I think you can hit block cap without Renly's training, so you don't have to worry about that. And it means we can get answered call, so we get tons of these like spirits and minions helping us out, which is actually quite a bit of buffs. One of them gives block chance, increased defenses, you get increased damage, all of this stuff we just get for free. And since we have so many totems, we're probably gonna have every single spirit out at once. It's gonna be pretty ridiculous in some boss fights if we actually need to put down that many totems. And we also get wooden wall, which is 20% less damage taken from hits, which is really nice. And currently the idea is Jade Heritage, which gives us 10% physical damage. So it's just a lot of a bit changes, of course, from the original Corrupting Cry. We know you don't have that cool block or insane block anymore. The actual strength part is going to be interesting. I have 600 strength in this build, but that's maybe a bit overestimate, possibly. I'm level 95, I think, in config. And we're probably going to have to take different nodes on the tree, depending on. I also have Circular Teachings, which is something you get from Heroic Strategy Jewel, which is from Expedition. Verona's an Expedition boss. Well, I don't think you have to kill Verona, but you get it from there. And it makes it so that instead of strength giving life, it now gives energy shield. I don't know exactly where this is going to go. Who knows if I go this route, but it might mean we can use that lineage support that I mentioned to not get that big of a downside from War Crying. Hard to say how this, I mean, there's so much optimization here to do. Who knows if this is a plan, but that's an idea, I guess, because Giant's Blood now gives you much less life when you pick it. So with this, you kind of swap that downside to an upside where you scale energy shield instead. So that could be pretty good. Anyway, that's the current plan. I'll be starting that. So if you want to come check out, see what I do to level or what I end up with, come check my stream. Thank you.